I finally played Alan Wake, and the spooky, creepy, and campy atmosphere of this remastered cult classic just shines through your TV screen, even if you do wish the lights and the curtain would have fallen just a little bit sooner. So get ready for a flashbang tossing, bus chucking episode of the series where we venture well beyond the rose-tinted haze to deliver a modern and fresh take on the games that you love. No sugarcoating, no fluff, no nostalgia. The year is 2010. Justin Bieber was yet a man, as Baby would become one of the most love-to-hate earworms of a generation, taking over wedding reception dance floors for the decade plus and the future to come. Apple had entered the tablet space for the first time, launching the iPad, which was the perfect method to play the latest level of Angry Birds for the 3,439th time.
Those goddamn birds.
Kick-ass, well, kicked ass, and Lady Gaga thought wearing a meat suit was going to be the advocacy statement that it definitely was not. And while a meat dress may not have given change to the world, a meat boy would drop in that 365, changing indie gaming in a big way. Not to mention a true smorgasbord of classics, including God of War 3, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and Red Dead Redemption landed within the annals of that year. 2010 definitely felt like a year of some sneaky good joints as well, with games like Limbo and Amnesia going on to be a couple of my personal favorites, much later after their initial release. Looking at the list of games from the year though, I noticed that it was a banner year for the Xbox 360. Halo Reach, StarCraft 2, and many other heavy hitters smashed into the monolith, none of which I played since I've never owned an Xbox in my life. Go ahead guys and gasp, I know.
Sony fanboy, here we go.
So, needless to say, those games, as well as the reason that you're sitting here right now, were missed by me back then and maybe are still living in the ether unplayed by me for all these years. Lots of nostalgia fodder. So let me know if there are some other Xbox exclusives that are now available elsewhere that you'd like to see me play via PC, PS5, or Switch. But yeah, was Alan Wake Remastered worth me reaching across the console war aisle nearly 2 whole generations later? Well, let's dive into the darkness. Development began on Alan Wake all the way back in 2003, right after Remedy dropped their latest hit, Max Payne 2. Now, in their downtime between projects, a desire to flip the script awoke within them, itching to try something new. Inspired by the likes of Stephen King and David Lynch, a Twin Peaks vibe had begun to brew, with an action thriller, horror, psycho thriller vibe. Sam Lake, creative director for the game, often conveyed that Stephen King's works heavily inspired him, influencing the psychological thriller and narrative-driven framework of the game. The team faced issues with their initial idea of a massive open world and eventually moved to a more linear design philosophy. It was just too difficult to maintain an engaging narrative with open world stylings in this game, and I think the final game was ultimately better for that. They landed on an episodic, TV series-like structure that really synced up well with the inspirations for the game. This was a pretty innovative approach to storytelling at that time, as they also included some actual television portions both in the game in the form of the Twilight Zone-inspired Night Springs, and for players to ingest even outside of it. Microsoft decided to partner with Remedy to release the game exclusively to the console as the publisher. Ultimately, this did muddy the field a little bit, as Lake said they had too many cooks in the kitchen. Eventually, a revised gameplay loop was born from some very intense sauna sessions. Glad we didn't have a gander into those. And they were finally able to push the game forward. Alan Wake was originally released on May 14th, 2010 to the Xbox 360, with an additional Windows release in February of 2012. Remastered versions hit the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series consoles in October of 2021, with the Switch version dropping a year later. Maybe Mortal Kombat should have tried that. Anyway, the version I played for this video was the PS5 version of the remaster. Upon initial release, the scores were incredibly favorable. Based on 100 critic reviews and just over 1,000 user reviews, 83 and, well, shit, 8.3 are the ratings.
Spooky.
Now, many of the reviews from critics and fans alike would praise the storytelling, atmosphere, tension, sound design, dense and meaningful world building that would eventually tie into an entire universe. More on that in a minute. And characters that you just can't forget. Now, the other side of the coin included complaints regarding the repetitive nature of the combat, tedious exploration, some poor stilted animation, and really just sometimes the game can overstay its welcome. Now, through all of this, Alan Wake garnered many accolades from the industry at large, as well as a modest sales record and cult status. Time magazine gave it the title of Best Game of 2010, as well as Best Horror Game, amongst other superlatives. Spike's VGA's nominated for the Best Sound Design and Narrative, and GameSpot gave it 7 nominations, winning Best Original IP, according to its viewership. The 2010 Annual Game Music Awards awarded it Best Score, praising composer Petri Alanko's powerful compositions. Currently, the game has sold over 4.5 million copies worldwide per Remedy CEO, Matthias Mellerin, with a couple of DLCs released shortly after it was initially brought out. And while it took well over a decade to come, a sequel is due out to release any moment. But right now, we're talking about Alan Wake OG, and much like the flawed yet relatable main protagonist, I feel like many good and bad things can be correct about this game all at once. And that protagonist is the man on the box and in the title, Alan Wake. Alan is a best-selling thriller novelist quite akin to the real-world master of horror we all know and love, Stephen King. He is currently afflicted with a serious case of writer's block after penning his popular crime fiction series Alex Casey, which had 6 bestsellers in 7 years. Seeking relaxation and hopefully a smidgen of inspiration, he and his wife Alice decided to take a break in the seemingly serene town of Bright Falls. Bright Falls, with its lush forested surroundings, crisp air, and mysterious fog-laden landscapes. It's like we've stepped right into the haunting and iconic universe of Twin Peaks itself. Now, things quickly spiral out of control and into a surreal nightmare. Alice disappears under bizarre circumstances, and Alan finds himself trapped in a nightmarish loop where fiction becomes his terrifying reality. Darkness veils the town, and shadowy figures, known as the Taken, are out to get him. Alan discovers that the horrors emerging from the shadows are linked to a story he doesn't remember writing, yet penned by his own hand. Imagine your own creations, your darkest fears and narratives turning against you. It's got a little bit of Stephen King, a little bit of Shyamalan in the twist right there.
What a twist!
Mirroring tales like The Dark Half or, basically every M. Night movie that he's ever made. As you navigate through the game, it unfolds much like a thrilling TV series with those episodic segments and nail-biting cliffhangers that keep you on the edge of your seat. Alan's journey involves tense moments where light becomes his main defense against the engulfing darkness and the malevolent beings that it births. And y'all, the psychological tension in Alan Wake is palpable. The more you explore, the more you'll question. What's even real? What's a figment of Alan's potentially unraveling mind? You're constantly trapped in this oscillating rhythm of reality and illusion, which stitches together a rich psychological tapestry that's bound to linger in your mind well after you've put the controller down. In the climax, the old god's song guides Alan towards an old lady named Cynthia, who gives him a light switch called the clicker. And with this artifact, he dives back into the alternate dimension where he kills Barbara, the dark and ominous figure that took his wife and changed their lives forever. But she is not totally destroyed in the moment. In order to prevent the dark presence from coming out, Alan must write a balanced and logical ending, or the dark presence will fill in the gaps to create the outcome it desires. So he writes an ending where Alice is set free, but he is trapped within the darkness's confines. He ends the novel with the words, "It's not a lake, it's an ocean." Boom. Now, Alan Wake massively combines literary allusions, cinematics, and an unsettling atmosphere to craft a story that is as captivating as it is haunting. Much like Mr. King's works, it explores the depths of an individual's psyche while intertwining the supernatural and the struggle of a writer. And with its Twin Peaks vibes, it introduces us to a small town that hides secrets darker and denser than the forests that envelop it. It's campy, pulpy, and has fucking Barry Wheeler. Like, every sleazy representative with a heart of gold should aim to be a little bit like Barry. headlamp and all. The ending to the narrative was a bit underwhelming, but the way it ties into the rest of Remedy world lore is pretty fascinating, even if it was done retrospectively. The RCU, or Remedy Connected Universe, actually began with Control, but was brought in via the second expansion. I haven't played it yet, but let me know if you'd be interested in my thoughts on the 2 DLCs. Now, I have played about a dozen hours of Control, and while that was a few years ago, the idea that Alan has a part in the way that the game, and to a lesser extent Quantum Break, plays out is a really interesting approach to game design in a world where most devs either keep games in the same literal world or break them out entirely. The beauty of this game's narrative threads are you can really just sit back and write your own theories, and you are probably at least partially right. It's kept vague and nebulous enough for a reason, and in that way it's much more Silent Hill than Resident Evil. I dub this adventure horror. Now, all in all, I loved the story, and it was really my motivation for going forward, even if it did chug along at certain parts. Though I mostly chalk that chugging feeling up to the gameplay itself. When you first boot up the game, you will be asked to choose a difficulty, easy, normal, and nightmare, which you cannot change mid-game, so choose wisely. I chose normal, as I always try to play these games in the way that the average person will. Now, the game is broken into episodes, a structure that serves the narrative very well, but the gameplay, not quite as well. Yeah. The first thing I noticed about this game is just how stiff it felt to control. Anyone that has played a survival horror game like this can probably expect that to some degree, but just know this game's age is definitely starting to show. Basic structure is one you are probably familiar with. See a cutscene, run through some environments, fight some enemies, sometimes hop into a car, rinse and repeat. Taken are your primary enemy in Alan Wake, shadowy, ominous figures that must be banished by the light, and then boom hammered by your weapon of choice. You also will eventually end up fighting inanimate objects taken over by the darkness, which require you to shine your flashlight on them before you get absolutely bodied by a dump truck, and not in a good way.
Hey, yo.
Combat consists of relatively unique method of dispatching foes, as you will need to break their darkness barrier first by shining a light source on them for a certain amount of time before your firearms will do any damage. And even if their shield is down, you can use your flashlight to temporarily blind them in their pursuit. You can also use flares to cause enemies to recoil as you get your bearings, a flare gun that will send most enemies to the light in one hit, or a flashbang that feels oh so satisfying to hit 3 or 4 enemies with all at once. The episodic nature also works smartly here for the combat, as the game can take and give weapons in a way that lets them tailor the way they want you to approach the areas. Outside of these more unique weapons, you have many standards like a shotgun, rifle, and handgun. These feel pretty good to shoot once you get the hang of them. Combat is less dense, but provides a good sense of dread and helplessness, and the fast reload mechanic really has you jamming on the reload button between shots to get yourself topped off. Bullet drops are plentiful on normal, especially as you get more depth, so do keep that in mind. And because of the format of the combat, there aren't really bosses either. You'll have bulldozers that animate and try to murder you, and a few variations on enemies like crows and fast-moving Taken that force you to change tactics, but then they keep reusing them as more normal enemies. The final chapter felt tough to work through, with one of the lamest final bosses I've fought in some time. Like, basically think if you started the T-103 fight in Resident Evil 2 with the rocket launcher.
Game over.
And some of the worst combat encounters and driving situations in the entire game. I definitely felt like the game was using up a lot of the goodwill it curried with me through incredible atmosphere, tension, and that uniqueness. Honestly, I'd say the gunplay in Alan Wake is solidly on the average side, even if by the end you definitely feel a bit OP. Now, beyond the combat, you will be exploring incredibly spooky environments. These were often my favorite parts of the game, as Alan Wake sets up its spaces incredibly well. You literally hit checkpoints as you enter certain lights, which leads to many tense dashes for the safety of those halogen bulbs. Some checkpoints are even tied to generators, which require inputs to turn on, only upping your blood pressure as you work to save yourself from certain death. There's lots and lots of collectibles to find, which really seemed like a design choice of this era. You can shoot over canned pyramids, find manuscripts, and even coffee canteens to jumpstart those writing sessions. Jumping and climbing feel truly terrible in this game, with awkward limb physics going straight spaghetti style. The enemy variety and combat variety are very lacking, and I know Alan is a damn writer, but could he have just a little more stamina? Like, why are you breathing so hard after dashing 10 yards, my guy? Also, these episodes can feel very uneven and bloated, with all of them having sections I definitely believe could have been shortened or maybe even cut out entirely. Chapter 5 is the best and the worst example of this. I was in love with like the first, about third. From the vibes to the church to the combat, working with the sheriff and Barry was just so much fun. The tension was there, and then I died once at the very end of a multi-way fight. I had to restart entirely before I could get into a chopper, and was not even like a third of the way through. I figured that was it. Things will happen you believe will be a capstone, and because of the format, it's like a movie that sort of overstays its welcome every time. Not all is bad, of course, with a brilliant atmosphere that is largely pushed by some fantastic environment design and lighting that works to great effect. The outdoor and indoor locales have a lot of character, dark corners and spooky Dead Space style wall scribbles that will make your nuts tickle. The team used a lot of real-life inspiration, such as Crater Lake in Oregon, as reference material for these beautiful open spaces and a structural designer for the man-made ones. You can tell a lot of love was poured into keeping a grounded feel of these areas, even while some supernatural, sensational shit is happening all around you. And it's all powered by a proprietary engine from Remedy called the Northlight engine. Less impressive were the updated character models for this remaster. Uncanny as fuck. Not to mention, Alan runs like he is in a Tekken 2 CGI ending with some truly terrible in-game lip syncing and stilted animations all around. But man, the places you visit are truly the show stealers. From old churches to underground bunkers, this remaster punches well above its weight in environmental storytelling. Another area that the game outperforms its 2010 skin is the audio department. Even beyond the moody and oppressive lighting, this really sets the tone in a palpable way. Directional sound effects that have you spinning the camera around, hung, dissonant, and atonal atmospherics that never let you feel completely settled as you explore. The rattle of gun blasts and flashbangs, it all feels very in your face and potent. Petri Alanko was the primary composer for the music in the game, and he did a bang-up job bringing the emotions to scenes with powerful orchestral sections that hit all the right notes at all the right times. In this interview via Remedy's official YouTube channel, he talks about how important emotion is in his music and how he conveys and evokes the feeling from the in-game characters within songs.
In order to have emotions in music, you really have to know the characters, you really have to feel them. Remedy has made a magnificent job at creating such characters because they have so many features and layers, and they are almost like a, how would I say, polyphonic instrument, because they have not only one color but multiple colors at once. And they are very believable, they are real.
Alan Wake also does a great job using real-world licensed tunes to sum up episodes' endings with tracks from Roy Orbison, David Bowie, and more. And the legacy of Alan Wake lives on both in the lore of Control, Pieces of Quantum Break, as well as with a direct sequel titled Alan Wake 2, coming out later this month. It takes place after Alan had been trapped in a dark place these past 13 years, attempting to escape via the way he got dumped there in the first place, via writing. It looks like it's going to be more horror heavy this time around, so if you guys want to see me do a review on this game, and even a nostalgia on Control, make sure to like and comment on this video, and I may throw them in to do next. Let's hit the RCU hard, y'all. I mean, we need one universe we can still believe in, right? So yeah, all in all, was Alan Wake Remastered worth playing? Yeah, I'd say so. The gameplay definitely is long in the tooth, with chapters that often overstay their welcome, some clunky controls and repetitive gameplay loops with limited combat scenarios. But this game has heart, and a lot of it. And after nearly 11.5 hours with Alan Wake, I left with a very strong impression of the finished studio and their design philosophy. There's not much worse to me in media than something forgettable, and Alan Wake will definitely not be a game that is easily forgotten. With incredible atmosphere, a panache and moxie to its storytelling you have to admire, and a stamp of uniqueness that it bears proudly, I think you could do much worse this October than visiting, or revisiting, Cauldron Lake, Bright Falls, and That Dark Place. I'm getting my typewriter ready for the sequel. And if you dug this video and you're new here, here's another great one for you to catch up on all things nostalgia. It's this video times about 10. What a value. Go ahead and click it now. Peace.